Boy, hello, good morning. Just a real quick check-in here. Hello, this is Justin. The date is Saturday, November 8th. They don't do Saturday morning cartoons anymore. Do they? I don't know. I don't have cable. I'm looking over, I got a lot of fun stuff in here. I've got, in the box, a brand new M2 Vision Pro because, something happens to them that, glass isn't meant to be curved like ski goggles quite that way. And so they all develop fractures on the outside lens. It's almost like you shouldn't make the outside of a very heavy thing also glass when basically no one can look at it. So mine got a little tiny scratch in it. And I was like, hey, I've got Apple Care Plus. I've been paying $25 a month for this for 2 years. And they're like, all right, cool, send it in. And then they just gave me a whole brand new one. I haven't opened it yet because I also bought an M5 Vision Pro. So if anyone wants to buy an M2 Vision Pro for a very high price, you let me know. Also got a over there. I got a new housemate. But you know what? Let's remind ourselves what we're listening to right now. Hello, this is Justin's in the Morning on KW Alpha Delta Pi. The show's name is Breaking Change. And every episode, the whole motif is that I have to cut a new major version release, and that release needs some sort of unique title for something that hasn't happened before. So I'm going to call this one version 46. God, I hope it's actually 46. I'm going to check. I never check these things. As far as I can tell, this is version 46. I'm sorry if I sound out of sorts. I'll make that clear in a moment. But first, the title: Adjusted Gross Intelligence, AGI. The combination of taxes and AI. We'll talk more about AGI in a minute, but I really hate it when we already have established acronyms for shit. Even if they're kind of relatively arcane, like, for me, POC still means proof of concept. I mean, I realize it's more important that it means person of color, but all I ever hear is proof of concept. There's a whole bunch of these, floating around, where for being 40 years old, it makes me feel old when newfangled acronyms come along. I've never liked AGI for that reason, because I'm like, does nobody here do taxes? Are we all going to pretend there was never already a thing for that? Now, granted, if you don't live in the US and you don't have such a complicated tax system, like, I'll give you a pass. But for everybody else, come on. Yeah, so I got a mini Starlink dish over there. It looks kind of like, I don't know, like a really big, one of those flat Lego pieces, but just about the size of a personal pan pizza. My brother is my new housemate. He's over there. I'm not trying to do radio voice right now, but I'm also trying to not wake him up because it's 7:30 in the morning and he's more of a late sleeper. But he's also a durable sleeper. So well, you know what though? But he's also not a complainer like me. That's why he doesn't have a podcast. And so the thing about it that I struggle with in my relationship with my brother, to be frank, who I hope is listening, is that because he doesn't complain, I very often don't know when I'm, putting him out. So then I spend more time worrying, did I wake him up right now? Am I actively waking him up right now? Is he silently just, enduring the annoyance of his brother talking in the other room to a bunch of strangers, even though he needs to sleep? I don't know. I'll never know because he won't complain, and he probably wouldn't admit it if I asked him. But Jeremy, if you're listening to this, please write in podcast@searls.co. Yeah, so anyway, it's his Starlink. I was trying to set it up as here's a segue. Trying to set it up as a backup for our home internet connection. I've been talking about how the community is discussing getting essentially municipal fiber to every house in the neighborhood. It would be $40 a month for 10 years for gigabit symmetrical internet. Sounds like a great fucking deal to three of us, and then the other 275 old people are not necessarily expressing a ton of enthusiasm, partly because they don't understand the technology, and partly because their use of the internet is fine as far as they can tell. But boy, Spectrum has been ever since that day. It's one of those things where you don't know if it's that you're paying more attention to how bad your internet is because you now have this dastardly hope that like maybe it could be better, or you don't know if it's just cosmic coincidence. But Spectrum has been down literally 5 days a week for at least 20 minutes. And I set up alarms on my Unify system just to kind of like get some more telemetry around it. I've got actually I had Codex CLI write me a WAN probe that runs every 10 minutes a battery of different tests like traceroute and other sort of like, internet network conditioning probes to log just exactly how fucked my internet is, so that I can run on more than just vibes when I go to Spectrum and they say, hey, turn the modem off and on again, and then that kind of sort of fixes it. Or like eliminate your entire network and then just plug directly into the modem, because granted, that's all that they can really control at the end of the day. But if I can really peg them to the wall and say, hey, your trace route all from outside of my house is like, meaning like a extremely slow and circuitous path out to the real goddamn internet. If that's all fucked in the ear, then finally I can actually point to something that is their responsibility. But yeah, it's been down constantly, so that sucks. And in fact, it went down today, but not for Spectrum's fault, but because living in Florida, living in Orlando, where we get more lightning strikes than just about anywhere in North America, thanks to being smack between two coasts, I had the whole house power flicker this morning at 6:45 when I was actually preparing the show notes for you, dear listener. And this is not an unusual occurrence. I'm very used to just hearing the sound of like the microwave turn off and on and everything, kind of like that clicking sound, just kind of endemic throughout the whole home. But then there was a distressing whine that was persistent, and I was really hoping would go away. Maybe it was a fridge compressor or something, and no, that was the alarm on my UPS, or my uninterrupted power supply. And I've got 6 of these UPS devices, that protect the electronic equipment in various rooms. Like the home theater wasn't that one. This computer wasn't this one. I checked theater downstairs, it wasn't that one. I knew it was probably one of those because when their batteries go, they have an alarm, and then they refuse to even supply basic power. The idea being like, hey, you really need to change the battery or else this thing is not working as it should, and the power has to run through it so that they can condition the power and yada yada and make the very unreliable, dirty power that I get from the state of Florida, clean it out into a sine wave. Get that current nice and mellow. And of course, with my luck, it was the UPS that had been so tenderly slammed into the patch box and carefully screwed in and mounted in such a way by my networking guy that I could not possibly hope to unplug it, much less extract it, much less get the battery out of there. And so, being 6:45 in the morning, I figured I'd just fucking yank it. And that worked, but it also destroyed my favorite mug. So I had this really cool mug from a trip that we took to the Skywalker Ranch out in Marin County for like a little weekend tour with some friends. And I loved that mug, not only because it was a good mug. You were a good mug, I loved it like people like pets, because I don't have pets or kids. So you get attached to shit like shampoo bottles, I've found. But I really loved that mug. And the reason I loved it from a design perspective was it had like a coaster bottom. So wherever I put it, I didn't have to worry about needing a coaster. Because I still, I'm 40, like I said, 40 years old, still don't really know what coasters are for. So I've got kind of like a latent coaster anxiety when I'm not using one. I realize condensation is a thing, but also, I don't know, shit happens. There's rings on tables and stuff, and Yeah, so that mug's gone, and I'm sad about it. The reason it's gone is I had to yank so hard that my elbow hits the mug right off the goddamn counter, and then I'm, scraping up little bits of porcelain off the tile. And no matter, when you break glass or whatever, no matter how many times you wipe it and scrub it and mop it, you didn't get it all, right? So I'm going to be stepping on little bits of porcelain all week. Uh, so I'm coming at you today with a little bit of that energy. I'm simultaneously really worked up about this mug. Not holding back tears exactly, but I'm pretty fucking pissed about my internet situation. I spent like all afternoon trying to figure out ways to make it better. I got all the wax paper, I rubbed it on all of the devices. They're going the same speed. And it's the worst kind of internet, right? Like there was an old Oatmeal comic years ago of like no internet versus slow internet, and no internet actually being kind of surprisingly delightful. You're like, oh, I guess I'll go read a book. I'll take a walk, because there's no tether to that outside world, and you realize, oh wow, I'm a full and complete individual. But slow internet, where you and this is why I started looking at traceroute, where you theoretically, if you go to a speed test, you have very high speeds once you've connected to something, but the initial connection between you and some other endpoint is so circuitous that you wind up with, I go to github.com and I hit enter, and then all of a sudden it's like 15 seconds until it goes from a white page to a something page. That is the goddamn worst. Slow internet, you just feel it in your viscera. So yeah. What else is going on in my life? The only other thing that comes to mind. The weather's been wonderful down here, especially for people who don't like the heat. It's been like a pretty consistent sunny 70 to 80. And seems like hurricanes are sort of settling into an every other year cadence for us. So last year we had Milton, I want to say. I had to run off to Savannah. And this year, it's just been real nice. And as a result, a lot of friends are deciding to make last minute trips down to Orlando out of nowhere, which is always welcome. Please come visit. And if I've got time, I'd love to take you to the parks or buy you a drink, hang out, see people. I love to be somewhere that people want to be. I'm not enough of a draw on my own, it turns out, for people to come visit. But if I can just position myself right next to Disney World, a lot of people come, it turns out. And I had a friend who I hadn't seen in years, known from kind of like conferences back in the day, Code Mash in Ohio, and see, you saw him at Gary's conference, Destroy All Software's Gary Bernhardt. Gary, if you're listening, hello. He had a probably my favorite conference ever in terms of just like taste, good taste as a conference. Great speaker selection, great design, great angle, deconstruct. And that was up in Seattle. And I think he ran 3 years, and I think I was there for 2 of them. Everything's a blur pre-COVID. But anyway, guy I ran into a few times over there, basically an internet friend for a while. He came down, and he's been here before, but he's got, a family with children. And relayed to me that, part of the experience of being a family with children and coming to Disney World is that you're doing it for the kids. Whether the kids want you to be doing it for them or not, you're doing it for the kids. So that means as the dad, you're Chevy Chase in this adventure. You're packing the car and you're stressing out, and these days you're fighting with the app to try to get the lightning lane passes or the reservation to the restaurant, or the booking the tickets, and all these kind of stressors pile up when you're not taking pictures and trying to capture moments and keep everybody happy and fed. And he came and just we just gave him a tour of the parks for a day. We got to go to a preview of the new Zootopia show, and that was at the ass crack of dawn. And so we just killed it. And we spent 14 hours in the parks. We did all of the major, attractions, had a great time. And it gave me the idea that as a service offering, I could just start a Disney Dad Rescue where all the all of my friends who've never really gotten to enjoy theme parks, because there's a child in all of us, but also if you've got real children, you gotta really suppress that child inside you so that you can make room for the corporeal children that are crying and refusing to eat their little Mickey shaped waffles. uh but just a kind of queen for a day. Hey, Justin will take care of everything. He'll be your surrogate Disney dad so you can enjoy your day. Because I've done that a few times for a few friends. Kind of did that when Aaron came, and we just had a blast. So yeah, I don't know what I would charge for this service. Right now, I'm still on the friends and family, alpha test, but it's going great. I have a lot of fun. And one reason I have a lot of fun with it, scrolling down. Man, I'm just going to pull this up. I'm pulling this up out of follow-up. This is going into the life section. I can do that. I have the power. One of the reasons, and I've told you all about this before, the reason that I like going to theme parks with people is you get all this dead time. You got the walking from place to place, you get standing in line, and you just can't help but have conversations that you wouldn't have if you were just meeting somebody up for drinks once a month for an hour. Because you're not, after you've caught up, there's nothing else to talk about except the meaning of life. And my friend who'd come to visit, he really gave me a doozy, gave me a lot of rope with which to rhetorically hang myself when he asked, because he's a little bit more of an AI skeptic, a little bit more of the thinking of LLMs as like a closed function, as opposed to seeing them primarily as, in terms of how I see all these tools, as these are tools that accomplish goals. How they work is an implementation detail, and if they don't work well, then the implementation detail suddenly does matter, but only if you choose to continue engaging when they don't work well. And if they do work well and you just kind of like continue to realign yourselves to the aspects about them that have a true value and function today with the technology as exists today, you sort of stop worrying about a lot of the bigger picture stuff because you're just using them like tools, and the bigger picture stuff will sort itself out. It's a collective action problem whether or not these things boil the oceans. And it's also kind of not my problem if the economy completely crashes and burns because of investor exuberance about this AI bubble. I just got to focus on what's in front of me. And so one thing I identified talking to him over the course of the day was that there's a lot of, I think, people who build stuff up from first principles, and that when they adopt a tool, they really got to understand really what's happening under the hood. And I think a lot of programmers are this way because the determinism of computing is maybe one of the traits that drew them to that industry. And he asked me at one point about AGI, about what do I think was the question. What do you think of AGI? Not adjusted gross income, but rather apparently artificial general intelligence. And I was kind of taken aback because for me, AGI, this discussion of artificial general intelligence, how close are we to Skynet? How close are we to a super intelligence that can, and you can define it in a lot of different ways. You could define it in terms of the AI is so smart that it can improve itself. And so then we get to this super fast, it's just constantly churning, constantly getting better. And when it doesn't need humans anymore to get smarter, it can run far afield of our expectations and do it many, many generations of improvement in the blink of an eye, so to speak. That's one definition. Another definition, and as Sam Altman and OpenAI try to lower the bar for what AGI is, I think they said basically replace a human researcher autonomously, which that's a fuzzy definition. It's probably, I don't know. My answer, actually, isn't that it's somewhere in between those two things. It's who the fuck cares? It's a made up marketing term. It's, it would be like talking about, display quality between, like a MacBook Pro of this era versus a 2015 MacBook Air, and be like, well, that new one has double the pixels, but is it really Retina? Well, no, like Apple just calls them Retina displays. It doesn't mean that there's like, like literally some sort of fucking mathematical proof that there cannot exist a Retina that can't see the individual pixels, or that if you don't move your eyes close enough, like we're arguing about the feasibility of something that is a fantasy, a marketing fantasy that wasn't really for you. Like the AGI fantasy is for the investor class. It's either to scare them into action. I think first it's that. I think a lot of the hellfire and brimstone and the terror of like what hath we unleashed was partly ginned up as a way to try to wake up the investor class into like, whoa, getting some FOMO. Because if this is actually imminent, I got to get a piece of this so that I can ride that wave, or else I'm going to be old money, right? And now it's the mathematical imperative that if you're going to have a valuation of trillions and trillions of dollars based on losing $20 billion a quarter and only earning $4 billion a year, whatever, those aren't the real numbers, but it's bad, right? You're burning a lot of money to make a replacement level return on the kind of investment we're talking. Like, AI needs to be more profitable and bring in more revenue than like the entire SaaS industry, like all the FANG companies combined as they exist today by like 2030. So now you need this specter of AGI or some superhuman intelligence, because the more money you burn, the higher the bar in terms of like what a good investment return looks like. And as the investment return becomes increasingly comical, you effectively just need some promise. Hey, we've got this glorious AI we're going to be able to put inside these shells of robots, and they're going to be able to do every single job ever. These carapaces will suddenly just animate and become replacement level humans, and we'll be able to stick them on every single task. And then white collar work will just cease to exist, because every single, communication network or link that's currently required between humans to get shit done, that's just going to all be seamless. And like, we're going to live in this, totally smoothed out utopia. If you can get to that outcome, then the investment return might make sense, even though the next question is, what kind of world are we living in? What is the utility of money when nobody has jobs? How do we divvy up resources when only 5 people have the money? All these sorts of follow-up questions become problematic, but that's what it leads to. So that was my first reaction to the question of like, what do I think about AGI? And I realized like, I think that if you're thinking about the tools that exist today in terms of them existing on some sort of continuum, or as a waypoint in the journey to getting to artificial general intelligence, you're not thinking about reality. You're not thinking about like, what are these tools actually doing? Like, what is an LLM? What is a coding agent? What is a diffusion-based image generator? What are these new video generation tools? And I think that thinking about those discrete tools as if they're all part of some sort of linear trajectory towards human-like intelligence both betrays any understanding of how those individual tools work, because there's actually very different disciplines that go into building each of them, and they don't necessarily have some sort of connective tissue that adds up to, what we understand to be a brain. But also, I think just if you think of it narratively, if you think of it as like a mental model, it robs you of the ability to look at those tools on their own terms and think and evaluate them based on what can they do, what can they not do, and what are the prospects for them to get a little bit better, over the near term. So it was a good example of just realizing that how much the broader hype ecosystem distorts people's perspectives around what are we looking at today. Because when you really dig into it, taken at its extremes, if you listen to the hype and you say, well, I don't think programmers are going to get completely replaced, because what about compilers and these very, very finite, like very challenging, questions where you can kind of like proof by contradiction. Well, an AI could not do this thing because, there's a proof that was written and this is true, that like LLMs can't generate stuff that is truly outside of their training data. They can't make truly novel jokes. They can't invent new information. They can just remix. I'm like, well, yes, there are probably tasks that they can't do and will never be able to do, but like how many programmers are doing those kinds of tasks? Virtually none. You could absolutely replace 99.9% of programmers out there because most 99.9% of us, myself included, are just remixing other shit. You're just digital pipe fitting things together. So yeah, technically you're right. AI can't replace every single programmer, but it can replace enough of us that we no longer call programming a profession, right? Programming just becomes a thing that a dozen people do up in some ivory tower somewhere. And like, yes, you're still technically right, but most of us think about the tech industry as an industry that employs humans, and a lot of humans. And if it suddenly employs a lot less of humanity, then its economic relevance as an industry goes away. Because you're not going to have, 4-year degree granting institutions handing out degrees for something that has literally no jobs. Well, I don't know that. They still teach philosophy. But you know what I mean. It's not, we're not going to be sending all our kids to study STEM, right? And that's the problem. It's going to have to come from somewhere else. So, good thoughts. The stuff that you talk about while you're in line for Pirates of the Caribbean. You know how it is. All right, let's follow up on some shit. Adam McCrae, who I assume listens to the show. Hi, Adam. He wrote a blog post after listening to me rant, also on the show, about Heroku and how Heroku, the web service provider, the platform as a service that hosts all of my applications, and with whom, full disclosure, I've been very friendly over the years. I've got several friends who work at Heroku. I've got several blog posts about Heroku stuff that has gotten the attention of their product organization on numerous occasions. And they reach out to me every now and then to either show me works in progress, to demonstrate that the thing that I was concerned about, that they're fixing or that they're improving or rolling something out, and they'd like my either feedback on it or for me to maybe correct the record and update an old blog post that still has good Google SEO and is saying, based on outdated stuff. So like I've got a long-term relationship with Heroku. Generally, I love the company. And I wish that, for all of my complaints about Heroku, the biggest one is that I wish more companies were acting like Heroku and trying to provide a set it and forget it, no ops, no DevOps, no operational complexity, kind of continue to take off the developer's plate all of those operational concerns. I wish that there were more platforms that were aiming to do the same thing, and there just aren't. So, setting that aside, I was complaining last time around that built all this stuff for Becky, all this video encoding stuff she didn't have to do, this complex chain of editing selfie videos and CapCut to encode them correctly so that they would share correctly to Instagram or whatever that workflow is. I wanted her to be able to take video right off the phone and just using the photo picker, upload it to her app, and then have that, first of all, that upload not take all day, which is hard when it's 4K, 120 frames per second. That's going to be slow because it's a big file. But also, to transcode that on the server side. I wrote all that code, I made all that work, and then realized that in order to actually get enough RAM on a Heroku dyno that could use FFmpeg to transcode that video into the 1080p that Instagram requires, that I would need to, Performance L RAM is a special like $250 a month dyno, maybe $300 a month. And it's got 30 gigs of RAM, which is plenty of overhead to do a few of these at once. And, wouldn't you know it, turning on one of those queues by itself means I'm incurring a new $300 expense. And that's a lot for, maybe her posting 5 videos a month. So Adam wrote his blog post, I'll link to it in the show notes, He's got a product called Judo Scale, and it's an auto scaler, not just for Heroku, but for other platforms. I've known Adam for a long time, by the way. He was an OG at EdgeCase, which was kind of maybe the first Ruby on Rails consultancy that like truly gave a shit. Um, there were lots of good ones. There's HashRocket and other early ones that came along. Thoughtbot was early to the Rails scene. My friend Mark started Mutually Human in 2005, 2006. But EdgeCase was like, because I was in Columbus and they were in Columbus, they had Jim Wyrick, they had, a lot of people who contributed back to Ruby and Rails, like Matt Jones. That, special place in my heart. And Adam was, I think, he was a really important social glue to that team every time I came and visited. Not he was sort of an adult in the room. Not to say they were all technically adults, but he's an older soul. So I've always had a lot of respect for Adam, and he's got this tool called Judo Scale that it started being a Heroku specific, but it applies to anything. Where let's say you have that queue processor like I'm describing, and it needs to be really beefy like this. He wrote a blog post about how you can actually use his tool to scale down to 0 automatically, or keep it at 0 dynos by default, meaning $0 a month. And then whenever something hits that queue, and it's detecting how long something's sitting in that queue, which would be forever because there's nothing to process it, he'll detect that it's waiting, and then he'll tick it up to 1. And so basically it's, in my use case, it's actually not his normal use case, which is like, hey, you got slammed with traffic. You got to go from 20 processors to 40 processors to be able to handle burst traffic. That's typically when you think about scaling up or auto scaling your servers. For me, it was like more like a light switch. I want to be off almost all the time because I don't want to pay for this. But like if Becky uploads a video, I want to turn it on, run the thing for 5 minutes or whatever it takes, and then pay for that 5 minutes prorated and then turn it back off again. So he wrote a tutorial just for me. It's got my name on it and everything. And I just followed that tutorial and I filled it out. And it was lovely. So thank you, Adam. And so this is officially sponsored by Judo Scale, this episode. Of course, by that point, I was already in for a penny/pound because I'd been developing simultaneously while Adam was writing that post and listening to the show and writing that response. I was simultaneously developing a a client-side encoding solution. So client-side meaning in the browser, when you select a video attachment, it would compress it all right there. Well, first it would determine, do I need to compress it, or is it just the audio that I need to remux? Is it? Do I need to change the resolution? Is it longer than 1080? Pixels on either edge? If so, I got to scale it down to that. And so I had already almost had that figured out. There were a few things that were really challenging. There were several different APIs that you can accomplish this with in the browser. I have since learned, like the media recorder API, which basically, without seeing anything happen in the browser, it's kind of functionally in a hidden sense playing back that video in real time into a buffer as if it's playing it, and then it records that. And what's nice about that is you get what you really get a realistic image, like the HDR image comes through and all that correctly. What's a downside of that is because it's recording video playback in real time. If you're on a device that's very smart, for example, of like not prioritizing processing power to videos the user can't see, a bunch of frames are going to get dropped. And if the frames get dropped in the media recorder, they also get dropped in the output. And then that means that the effective frame rate of some of these 60 frame per second videos that I was running through it would come back at like 7 frames a second. Try writing an automated test that like asserts that the effective frame rate is what it started at. Additionally, if you drop a bunch of frames, then you got to like edit the timeline after the fact in the video container. The more you learn about how video encoding works, the more you learn that you really don't want to learn it. I think I might have mentioned that last time too. And so that now I'm writing code at these files to basically pad them out whenever they and insert interstitial bullshit frames, and those would just smear along. And then I discovered that the web codecs API actually can do the kind of encoding that I needed. It was just not obvious. And the way I discovered all that was I had Codex CLI, because it was ChatGPT that gave me this idea in the first place. I had Codex CLI running headlong, and you can kind of just intuit after a certain point, like, yeah, this is not going to be fruitful, because you can feel it sweat. You can see in the chain of thought. You can be like, oh yeah, he's struggling. He's trying, but he's like, he's clearly putting up yellow flags and stuff, and he's equivocating in sort of the text. And I say he, because the chain of thought reasoning it reads like somebody that I've seen as a developer countless times, of trying to make this thing work. It's not working. I'm starting to get a little bit nervous. The pressure's up. My responses are more and more frustrated because the plan and reality are continuing to diverge, and my time is also being consumed by either watching this or coming back and seeing just sort of bullshit responses and me saying, well, do it harder, keep trying, I don't know. So I decided to do a bake-off and have two different Codex CLIs side by side and say, you're going to... First, ChatGPT Pro gives me like two big option A and option B. You can continue down this media recorder route, or you can try a ground-up web codex-based fresh encode. Now, like Media Bunny and other dependencies, they exist to make this easy, but none of them support HDR off the iPhone. And so they would all do this really shitty tone mapping against it. So if I wanted to actually retain all the quality, I had to basically build my own encoding. And I didn't want, not me, right? The computer had to do it. So I had it do it, and it worked. And the way that I figured out which path was the right one was to have that bake-off. So I had one terminal on the left doing the option A, following down the media recruiter route, and then the option B in the second terminal was doing the web codecs implementation. And I just turned on auto mode, and I walked away for 2 hours, and I came back, and the web codecs one was working and had the test passing, and the media recorder one was still churning through hundreds of thousands of tokens running in circles. So I got to a working solution. Now, I still had to spend a couple days kind of beating the ugly out of it and testing edge cases, and I wound up with a lot of... If you've been using AI to build stuff, to build programs, to build anything really. Hell, if you're just using ChatGPT to make like lesson plans or write emails for you, hallucination is a problem unless you're able to actually have some sort of automatically verifiable win condition. The reason that AI is so good at playing games like Go and chess or Tetris is because there's some sort of win condition or some sort of score that it's able to min-max. It's like, well, technically, even if I'm playing Mario Brothers in a really silly way, if I can make the score max out, or if I can get to the last level one way or another, even if it's extremely unexpected and doesn't look like quote-unquote good play, I can try a million different ways to make the number go up. And as long as the number is higher than a human would have done it, even if it's not in the way that they think is the right way, quote unquote, the AI is still, in a sense, right. The problem is, in most aspects of life, we don't have a way to score an email, right? Or a paper or an essay, at least not in some objective way. And so really what ChatGPT is getting graded on, and what all these tools are being evaluated on most of the time, is user engagement or user feedback in terms of the thumbs up and thumbs down button. That's really the best that you can do for qualitative, subjective, evaluation. But the nice thing about code, and this is why it's been so useful as somebody who came up through the agile, test-driven development, behavior-driven development school of thought, is when I sit down to do some code, I think first and foremost, how am I going to test that? How do I verify that this acceptance criteria has been met? And that was such a formative part of my career. I think I've started doing acceptance criteria based development collaboratively, where we would we would take down the requirements, and then we'd work with the product owner. We'd list out, for this feature, you will accept this if it does A and B and doesn't do C. Got it. And then we would go and we'd write some, given I'm a user and I'm logged in, when I do this, then this happens kind of scripts. And then we would wire those scripts up to some sort of automation. And then in exactly that fashion, the work wasn't done until those scripts passed. I'm just doing the same thing now, right? And so the tests that I wrote to make this all work were really, really, really challenging. They required some ingenuity. You had to think about things like, okay, well, and the AI can help with aspects of writing those tests, but will generally lack the creativity for coming up with them. Because now I'm looking at video that it says is right, but is actually like full of black frames. Like it says, oh yeah, it's totally right. And I'm like, well, okay, so now I need something that'll do black frame detection. And if it's more than a few black frames are inserted over the course of this 3-second video, then no, that's a fail, right? So you start locking in everything that you see wrong with the outcome until you end up with a couple of tests, like I did in my case, where there's 70, 80, 90 assertions between, audio similarity, visual similarity, the number of like repeated frames, the number of black frames, the amount of the chroma subsampling, and getting the color checks at various pixels at various frames across different videos. Those are all things that you can automatically do with FFmpeg's probe tool. And I just had to have it do it. And yeah, the tests are slow, but I've got all the time in the world because I'm just letting some robot crank on stuff. And so when I had all those tests, I was able to get it to actually get to the outcome that I wanted. And the code was ugly, but it also I could click a button and the video would turn into the video that I wanted. And it looked right to me and it sounded right to me. And it was like 90% smaller files. So at the end of the day, I don't care that it's ugly. So that's where I wound up. So now I've got this solved in two ways. I both have Adam's judo scale wired up so that if this client-side thing ever fails, I can take comfort in the knowledge that I've got this background job that will run, and it will run affordably. And it might take a little bit of time, but it'll do that in coding in the more reliable server-side way that everyone's very familiar with, that's tried and true. And if I have somebody on a supported browser like the latest iOS Safari or Chrome, they will compress on the client side and upload a much smaller artifact and then save me that server expense. So right out the gate, because this is a novel thing and I haven't seen other people doing it, I knew I wanted to make this open source, and so I released an open source library, my first NPM package in years, called Straight to Video. Like Aladdin 2 skips the theaters, goes straight to video. And it's something that you can download and play with, but also this was nice because since it's all client side, this is one of those open source projects where I can have a demo page and you can click it and get value out of it. So if you go to the straight to video page, it's linked to from the blog, you can try it now. You can optimize a video, click it, see how much space you'd save. It'll download the compressed version and you can play with it yourself. And then of course, it's got a README and instructions on how you would actually install and use it in your own application. But the takeaway for me from that project and from open sourcing it, and I had fun, because as soon as I thought of the name Straight to Video, I was thinking about my days working at Blockbuster and sort of that retro vibe, where that was also an era where we were happy to trade quality for convenience, being able to play movies at home. The thing about it for me is so much server expense out there. It's not, Heroku is a symptom of the problem that is inherent here. It's, yes, on a marginal basis, Heroku really charges you an arm and a leg for the scaled up version of various services, like they would in this case. $300 a month is usurious. And yes, if it was on AWS, it would only be $100 a month or $80 a month. And that would be better. But fundamentally, the root cause problem is why are we having servers do this at all? Everyone's walking around with these iPhone 15, 16, 17 Pros. They are essentially supercomputers relative to where we were a decade ago. Those CPUs are basically idle all the time. The pros in particular have all this, like, not just video decoding for playback, but video encoding specialized hardware on the chip that basically never gets used, unlike, like outside of people literally taking photos or maybe sharing photos. And all that idle capacity is just sitting there. And also it's sitting there on the chip that is literally the most power efficient chip on the planet. Because it sips power. So why aren't we using those chips to do all this work? And why instead are we having these servers, which are already hot, already high utilization, and most importantly, a lot of server farms out there are still x86, which are super wasteful from a power perspective. And even worse, very few of them, before the AI boom, almost none of them have hardware acceleration, like GPUs plugged into them. And so they're not optimized for video encoding. So now you're CPU, constrained. And so you're really, it's just super wasteful. And I'm not like a big green hippie kind of guy, but none of this makes any sense because now you're making the user upload a gigabyte file that could be 100 megabytes. And so they're waiting on their 30 megabits per second Spectrum cable broadband connection, taking them forever to upload, only so it can go to a server. Then the server is going to have it like, okay, well, it's an S3 on AWS. Now the server has to download it, which is more bandwidth. And then they got to run it through this transcoder, which is a ton of inefficient CPU clocks at great expense. And then they got to upload it back to AWS so that there's now 2 copies of it. And then hopefully they clean up the other one. Otherwise, it just sort of sits on a disk forever because, like, essentially what you actually want to distribute all the time, whether it's to a social platform or whether it's for playback purposes, is that leaner, simpler version. So I don't usually make appeals that, hey, you should use this library because it's going to save the planet or something, but you should totally use straight to video if you have an application that accepts videos. Like, just plug it in. It's kind of a no-brainer because the time it takes to compress on any modern browser and modern hardware is going to be way less than the time it would have taken that same user to upload the thing. So it saves time and money. Just do it. Only other thought on that. Rails 7 and 8 have successfully moved us away from the bad old days of Webpack and bundling all of our JavaScript assets in these bespoke transpilation compilation chains. Concatenating. It started with concatenating your JavaScript into one big file and minifying it and running it through some gentle processing, and then it became this full-blown everyone chasing future versions of the language and then compiling them down with polyfills, and then that became unto its own all of these other complexities, like we're going to bake JSX and these other kind of non-language tools into the process of how we bundle our code. And Rails 7 did a great thing, which was embrace import maps, where you could just trust the browser and HTTP2 to download lots of small little files and import them as native modules. And you could just sort of publish JavaScript and no longer worry about all of that bundling. I realize that for a follow-up section, this is pretty technical shit. So if you're not a programmer, I'm sorry. But basically all that to say that JavaScript distribution in the modern ecosystem is actually supposed to be really easy. And yet it's not, because it doesn't solve for JavaScript that was written to work on both browsers and also on servers using like Node.js and related technologies. Because my thing that I just wrote is really small. It almost exclusively uses native, native APIs in the browser. But like none of those actually exist for the container level stuff, like the MP4 shit that I have to do. Like I still need a dependency for that. And so the container level stuff, even though the codec and the actual encoding is covered by the new web codecs API, you still end up for muxing purposes, you need some dependency to handle that. Which means I had to pull in something called Media Bunny. I think it was previously called MP4 Remuxer, but now it's like this whole suite of tools. And Media Bunny runs on servers and on clients. And unfortunately, when you try to install that with import maps using Rails, it will pull in this other shit that you don't want. And because it's pulling in this other shit that you don't want, It just doesn't work out of the box. There's no one-liner, and I trust me, I tried, that you could install my new thing using Rails import maps and get that Media Bunny dependency and then have a working configuration. You'd always end up with this other shim that was replacing some built-in Node.js thing, and then have that resolved to a impossible, illegible, garbled URL, and then have that break all your shit. And the only solution, short of telling people to write their own shell script to like clean up this mess if they're using Rails, the only solution was for me to write a gem that just packaged the correct two files, my file and this Media Bunny distribution, so that they could be imported correctly without additional configuration by the user, by the developer. Which means that in addition to an NPM module called straight to video with hyphens or dashes, I now have a Ruby gem called straight to video with underscores. And what does that Ruby gem do? It lives in the same repository, has no code other than just defining, hey, these are the assets, add them to the import paths so people can import them. Really depressing, really frustrating. I mean, if you were around in 2011 when the asset pipeline and Sprockets was new and Rails was first getting a lot of these technologies, the bad old days was everyone was starting to have to release gems called asset gems that just bundled JavaScript files that could have been just downloaded off the internet. And so here we are again, and I'm writing asset gems, and it's 2025, and this is pretty fucked. So if you've got a good solution to this problem, you let me know. I think that the real solution is probably that import map Rails gem needs to be a lot better than it is at fetching and managing versions. But, you know, writing version managers is hard, so I get it. But anyway, that was a lot of programming shit. I know you're not all necessarily here for it. Thanks for embracing embracing the whole Justin, because that programming shit is actually a shitload of my life. It's not, in terms of the things I care about, it's certainly the things I enjoy doing. It is a small piece of the pie, but I'm over there in that back corner in that Eames chair for what seems like 8, 9, 10 hours a day sometimes, sweating this stuff, trying to make shit work. And once it works, it's great because then I don't have to think about it again. But this was a case of like a solid week of my life just gone forever because this was a hard one. So anyway, straight to video, check it out. One thing that made it a little bit less obnoxious, I mentioned that the M5 Vision Pro was arriving last time we talked. It arrived. I opened it. I set it up. And I immediately could not tell the difference between the M5 Vision Pro and the M2 Vision Pro. But I could tell the difference. Now, the hardware is identical. The setup process, identical. The OS is identical. There is... The first thing you'll notice that's any different at all is that everything in the operating system is snappier. And you go back to the other one, you realize it is not so snappy. And so you have this relativistic, oh wow, you hit that crown and the apps are right there. You click on a thing and you are there and it's open and you're not. I didn't even realize I was waiting for stuff in the M2 Vision Pro, partly because it wasn't just showing me, it doesn't have, Apple has moved beyond progress bars and spinning animations. You just sort of like, and the sound effects is sort of like swoopy 3D sounding sound effects. I think did a lot of work to make it feel like stuff was happening because there's like movement and spatial shit and like not animations quite, but there's like, a window kind of comes towards you from a fuzzy nether world and it buys them 300 milliseconds of lag, right? Because you're seeing this thing kind of approach you, either coming from the screen into the world or from somewhere towards you. And so there's all these sorts of things, like the weights that the M2 Vision Pro was able to hide, through those animations, where the M5 is like, nope, fuck you, but here's all your shit right away, real fast. So, I do appreciate that. It's much snappier, but like, that's not a reason to spend an extra $3,500. One reason to spend an extra $3,500, however, is... Okay, it's still not good enough. No, there's not a good reason. It's just nicer. And The foveated rendering is a little bit less aggressive. That means that you see more pixels, more sharpness. When I'm using Mac Virtual Display, it's tighter dot pitch. I can see more. I can also look out the corner of my eye a little bit more, and so I can read more text without having to actually move my eyes to look at it directly, which is nice. But really, for me, more so than the $3,500 upgrade is this $300 developer strap that was announced a couple days later, hence the developer strap-on title, which only one person complained about. I don't know. I thought that I'd shaken all of the prudes from listening to me, but one person had a problem. The new developer strap, that's way faster, and 20 gigabits per second. When you plug that thing in to either of those two Vision Pros, and you've got a MacBook right in front of you, and you start that display sharing mode, it is goddamn instant. It is so fucking fast. It is, you are looking at the screen right away. You hit a key on the keyboard, and then get this, the letter shows up on that display instantly. Not 30 milliseconds later, but like right the fuck away. And you get used to that for a little while. And then the crispness of the text, because it never has to kind of dither or blur it to mask, latency in the connection or hiccups or dropped packets. It is real nice. And since that virtual display is my primary use case for the Vision Pro, you don't really need the M5 one. I like the M5 one. It is faster. But you do probably want that strap on, developer strap. Sorry. And yeah, it's another $300, but if you're a sicko like me, you're going to spend that money. So just do it. Downside of that though is stupid bug. If you plug it in 2 times, if you deign to use that thing twice, the second time you're going to be stuck at USB 2.0 speeds because of a bug. Because I don't know, like maybe they don't actually use retail hardware configured like retail hardware over in Cupertino, because the only way to reclaim it is to use the Apple configurator tool, which is normally for like enterprise and school deployments. And using that developer strap that is now capped at 480 megabits per second, using the developer strap in conjunction with the Apple configurator on a Mac, you have to do a hard restore from a firmware IPSW file. I had to actually document how to downgrade it on the blog because there was no good documentation on how to even fucking do this. But if you jump through those hoops and you downgrade your Vision Pro, or otherwise apply an operating system using that route as opposed to an over-the-air update, if you do those things, then the Vision Pro will once again be able to use that developer strap at 20 gigabits per second. So be mindful of that. You can check that in the about settings of your, MacBook while you're connected. And if you're confused by any of this, again, I'm sorry. I'm in the weeds, but this is apparently I'm talking to you today. I'm realizing I haven't talked to humans this much in a while. So that explains that. I've been in the weeds. I've been in the wilderness for quite some time, and this conversation is making me realize just how much I've fallen off the planet last few weeks. But apparently I'm the kind of guy who does that. I was gonna say, but I'm getting better. I'm like, I'm not getting fucking better at all. I'm getting worse. I don't even have a fucking job. What am I doing with my life? I'm gonna drink some cold coffee now. Well, that took me an hour to process. Another cool thing you can do when you have that faster dingus, the little dongle out your right ear, the developer strap. I had the idea last night because I was looking at like, hey, could I stream games from my gaming PC, either flat games or Steam VR games from the gaming PC? And I was thinking again, like, and if you read about it, like most people are like, it's very important that you like really nail the Wi-Fi conditions. And I was like, man, I really don't want to do that. The new M5 Vision Pro doesn't even come with the faster Wi-Fi. It's still on basic Wi-Fi 6. I've got 5 access points spread throughout the house, but the more access points or the more mesh that you have, it doesn't like that actually means that you're trading coverage for direct speed because you're more likely to wind up in some sort of indirect routing situation anyway. So I'd have another router. I realized, oh yeah, I've got a USB-C port now. I can plug in an Ethernet adapter that's a USB-C to Ethernet, and then plug that into the switch that's right connected to the computer. And Bob's your uncle. And wouldn't you know it, Bob is my uncle. And so I plugged that in last night, and I was able to play a flat game as well as played some No Man's Sky in VR. And No Man's Sky performed better in 4K on my Vision Pro than it did with a PSVR 2 that was just hardwired over USB-C to the same PC, which is impressive. Yeah, I was able to get 90 hertz, which, looking at the little performance dingus at the bottom, if you're trying to do 90 frames per second in a video game, apparently you have an 11 millisecond budget for the game to deliver each frame to your eyeballs. And it was delivering at 9 milliseconds per frame. So just enough. So that's pretty fucking rad. It is now the best looking VR headset. Now it's still got some issues with like motion blur and stuff. The pass through is a little bit too gummy, but if you're just playing kind of like a stationary VR game, it's a real fucking nice experience. And the audio pods on the sides sound better than just about any VR headset does in terms of their straps. So yeah, if you want to spend 3,500 plus 300 plus 2,000 or so on a gaming PC just to play VR games, of which there are functionally no new VR games in years because the money dried up for that when they realized it wasn't going to be the next big thing. If you want to do all those things and also jump through a bunch of hoops with some shady fucking open source that is Windows open source, which is a harder to work with than like Homebrew. I had to turn off all of the virus scanning on downloads so that I can run these installers. Who knows what they did to me? Yeah, ALVR is the name of the one that can stream the VR apps, and it works great. And Sunrise and Moonlight can do the streaming for the flat games using what was a technology from NVIDIA that they kind of stopped working on. And that's a really good game streaming, protocol. So yeah, that's cool too, being able to use that for gaming. Let's see what else I got going on. Follow up. Did a hot seat Q&A. Jeremy came with me to do Orlando ODevs downtown. So I was invited to go to a meetup there. They asked me to speak, and I said I don't do that anymore. And I said I do talk a lot. I will happily stand there and take questions for as long as people have questions, because I will guarantee that I will wear them down faster than they will wear me down. And it was actually a pretty good contest. They wore me down at a healthy clip. Great community, great people. It was interesting because there was a little bit of a demographic split. I think the people who go to meetups today, it's a lot of younger folks who are just fresh out of a boot camp looking for their first opportunity, or they're looking to break into the industry, and so they're trying to meet people, which is great. And then a lot of older folks who maybe, empty nesters who still are working, and they're commuting every day, but they have more time in the evenings to do the sort of extracurriculars like go to user groups and maybe share some of that wisdom. It's a really kind of cool opportunity, you would think, for more experienced people to rub off on some of the younger folks. Not literally, but like figuratively. But, maybe literally. I don't know. It's really hard to meet people these days. It was a great time. A lot of people have a lot of the same questions about AI, and I thought that by engaging with it to the extent that I do, that I'd have a better pulse on like what percentage of developers are actually using this stuff in anger. How many people are actually like engaging with this stuff versus just reading articles about it or kind of following along what their kind of crowd is saying about it without too much real use. And now I get it, because like if everyone was talking about it a framework and your job doesn't use that framework, you're not going to just pick up that framework for fucking fun unless you are a weirdo. But the thing about AI is that, like, if you invest 3 hours of time into it and you try, like, you can probably get back 3 hours of value over the next 10 hours, regardless of what kind of technology you do. So the risk reward is a lot different than, like, oh, there's a new programming language and people won't shut up about it, but like I know my job's never going to use it, so like there's 0 point in me learning that in my free time. I think that the genericness, the general applicability, even though there's a lack of general intelligence, the general applicability of AI is such that, like, I thought more people would engage at least a little bit. And what I'm finding, and I asked them to shoot me emails afterwards too, with follow-ups, and I always offer, hey, shoot me an email. You dear listener, you shoot me an email, podcast@searles.co, and I'll read it. And I told these folks I will reply to every one of your emails. And they came through. I got a lot of emails, and those emails demonstrate what I heard when I was hearing questions, which is like very, very few people have earnestly engaged with this stuff. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of confusion. A lot of people who, like, will ask ChatGPT a question about their sports team that they like a few years ago and it got an answer wrong. So they just figured, I guess AI is worthless. And they never came back, and they're just now checking in again. It was disconcerting. And I'm going to be honest, and maybe a couple of them are picked up the podcast after seeing me there. I'm concerned that I'll put it this way. There have been industry transitions in the past that we sort of have either a historical or maybe a grandparent or an older uncle or something, like a story about somebody who lost a job when a factory closed or during a big upheaval in a market. And I heard a lot of these as a kid because of the disruption that impacted the automotive industry in the during the energy crisis in the 70s, union strikes in the 80s, as well as the Japanification of non-union based Japanese factory work in the South, in the Sun Belt states. So I heard a lot of stories like this about the people who lost their jobs. I had some family members who lost their jobs in those transitions who were really bitter, who had to go do other things, who tried to skill trade in other things, and they were always sort of just between stuff after that. They never really found another thing. And I had others, like my mom's dad was this way, where he kind of went into consulting and, like, I think made a lot more money, like was super successful through those transitions and got to do more creative engineering kind of stuff by playing the field and by staying kind of on top of his game, riding those disruptions to new opportunities. And I didn't fully appreciate that people are not completely helpless, right? It's not just some big macroeconomic wave comes out of fucking nowhere, knocks you on your ass, and then you're just fucked forever, I guess. It's one thing to say, well, if you stick your head in the sand, your skills are going to go, are going to be less valuable, and fewer people will want to hire you because you will have less marketable skills. That is a banal thing to say. It's another thing to think about it and see it in action and see, like, boy, I can think of half a dozen programmers who are fucking killing it right now. Like, I'm so proud of my brother. He's like doing AI shit at cars. He's building actually useful features that are really resulting in cars making more money. Just impressive. In a world where we're hearing about most of these AI, I say he's working at cars. I don't mean he's building cars. He works at cars.com, and he's working on, like, all of their AI initiatives. And there was recently quarterly announcements. They announced a lot of this stuff and talked about the revenue impact it's had. You can go read it. So I'm not sharing any proprietary information other than to say he's been very close to all that, and he's been riding that walrus, and it's the revenue impact that it's already had is really remarkable. And it's all upside. No one's getting screwed in that transaction. And Jeremy is, providing a lot more value that value is being seen more by others. He's really engaged. I haven't seen him this engaged by his work in years. And he's dialed in. And it's because of this macro change that resorted all and recombobulated all of the factors in the environment that maybe had been leading to some sort of status quo, and like everyone kind of assuming everything was going to just be the same forever. Things got jostled enough that it created the opportunity for him to like do it. And that's one way to be. And the other way to be of just being a victim, that the macro change, oh yeah, well, I really only wanted to, or I was only willing to, or I only had the creative ability to think of this job as like a fixed thing. Like I may have mentioned this before, I've talked to like doctors and lawyers and accountants who talk to me like, yeah, I went to school for a long time to learn how to do this one thing so that I'd never have to think again. So I'd never have to try again, never have to learn again. Like they felt like the social contract to which they were owed was, I went and got my education, and I paid for it. And in exchange for that, I deserve 40 years of uninterrupted status quo, getting increasingly large paychecks as I work up a career ladder. And to ask anything more of me, like not just additional learning, but like the agility to have to hop between different, whether it's employers or ways of doing stuff or ways of thinking about your profession critically, that's seen as a violence committed upon them. Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, I'm just saying, when I talk to a bunch of people, it's increasingly looking like, and I can spot it now because I've been talking to enough people about AI, which of those two fucking camps you're in. And if you're in the camp of people who are just sort of like treating this like something that's being done to you, I got bad news for you. Something's going to be done to you. Instead, there's just this tremendous opportunity to like do cool shit, increase the scope of your ambitions, and use these things to ride a wave to build awesome stuff. And yeah, if all those servers turn off 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, we'll talk about the cool gravy train that was. But in the meantime, the odds-on likely favorite is, yeah, a lot of these companies are going to fail. And by the time that they do, we're going to have local LLMs that are just as good as the server-based ones that we're using today. And those ones are good enough to do a lot of this stuff. So why wait? All right. That's enough follow-up. That was granted, that was more than usual. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm just glad to be here, man. And of course, I just played the jingle for the pun part of the episode. It's the part where Aaron Patterson donates a pun to our secret society of people who listen to this program, and then I rank them and I put them on the public internet at justin.searles.co/puns. And as soon as I did, the doorbell chime, well, how I experienced this, my lived experience of what just happened, while I took a little break here and paused recording, was I just heard a kind of like if a woodpecker was on meth and just like beating drywall. And I traced it down, and it was coming from the doorbell chime. And I pulled the cover off, and sure enough, the little piece of metal is going and drilling into it, just soft enough to not engage the actual like ding dong ring a bell kind of chime, but still like loud. So I got to the garage where the doorbell transformer is up there above the panels. And I only know what that is because we had to replace it 5 months ago. And that's clicking continuously. Probably not supposed to do that. So, trace that down, turned off that breaker. I'm just going to leave it off for a while. Let it think about what it's done. Fuck me. All right, well, let's read the pun. I've not read this pun yet. I don't know what it's going to be All I know is I wish I could just wire my house all over again. I was thinking, you know, my brother, he was giving me a hard time about why not just do solar and a whole home battery? And the answer is that my home has 400 amp service and I don't want to like half-ass it, right? And just have half of it covered by the battery and the solar. And no one supports 400 amp service yet because it's a ridiculous amount of power. Maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, there will be products for that will gladly take double the money or whatever. But I've been holding out for that purpose. But now I'm starting to think like maybe I just want to pull the fucking trigger. Fuck solar. Just put the goddamn battery in place. If any of them exist as like a UPS that can just clean the energy. So that I'm not continuously damaging all of my electric stuff in this house. The number of LED lights I have to go through because they're not getting continuous current is insane. I talked to a solar guy about it, a guy who's an electrician who specializes in that, and he said, sorry, but like, there's no such thing as a home battery that does that. I need a UPS just so fucking big. Deep breaths. All right. Aaron's pun. Without further ado. A doctor keeps telling me I need more electrolytes. But all of the lights in my house are already electric. Boy, that's topical. I did not tell Aaron I was having power issues, although he was just over at the house and he may have observed. He might have been able to hear the slight buzz that all of the lights in the house make. Fortunately, the older you get, the less you can hear shit, so only children hear them, which is one reason that children are not welcome in this home. Also, they have sticky hands. Doctor keeps telling me I need more electrolytes, but all the lights in my house are already electric. Well, let's put it up on the board. See where this lands. Let's see. I don't know. I'm gonna say we're gonna engage in a little maneuver I like to call copy paste. And copy, and let's see. Now, of course, if it's not clear, sorry, I'm a little distracted. If it's not clear how this is a pun, electro and light sounds like an electric light. But it also could be the critical mixture of sodium and potassium and that other one that we need to hydrate ourselves, and which has been recently marketed through a variety of products that cost way too fucking much money for being those 3 very cheap ingredients. But the potassium does get sticky, which is why it begs to be put in a tiny little product. So you have a million packets instead of just one gigantic electrolyte. You know, that's why they don't sell protein powder size gigantic things, just electrolyte. Although there's a subreddit for that if you want to mix your own electrolytes at home. So that's the joke. The problem with insurance company ads, all of their bold claims. That's number 7. Number 5, every time I go to the gym, I'm like, how's that working out? I'm in such a bad mood about the electrical thing that I'm like, anything about electric, you're just the new number 1. Fuck this. Number 15, I heard most cars are designed by a steering committee. I've been doing a bisect algorithm lately with this, like start halfway and then work up and down. But I need to inject some randomness into the algorithm. So I'm going to just fucking pick a spot. Chaos rank. Number 3, I thought installing a new shower would make my house worth a lot more, but it turned out to be just a wash. It's a classic one. The electrolyte one's good. It's creative. It doesn't sound like a normal pun. Also, for as much, I've been thinking about electric lights my whole life and electrolytes half my life, and I never made that connection. So I want to reward that somehow. I once worked with a JavaScript programmer that would only work mornings. I guess they were an AM and PM developer. I like this one more than that one. Took me a while to figure out how to get my boat to float, but then I let it sink in. I also really like that one. I'm going to wedge it between those two. I'm going to say this is the new number 8. Or, excuse me, new number 9. I can just, there's that paste operation I was telling you all about earlier. All right, new number 9 pun. Doctor keeps telling me I need more electrolytes, but all of the lights in my house are already electric. I look forward to the pun sort, which is just probably a month and a couple weeks out. Aaron and I will, as we do, engage in resorting these, and we'll have fewer than last year. Last year we had 26, it looks like. And this year we're probably on track only for 20. Because all these hotfix episodes, future releases, me realizing that I don't make money off this, so why the fuck do it when I don't feel like it? All these reasons contribute to fewer episodes this year. You didn't write me any emails the last couple weeks. I got very few emails. I got a couple that were like, hey, don't read this, but here's a really good question. I'm like, I don't know, man. Why are we putting NDAs on questions? And there you have it. There's the pun. Are you unsatisfied? Are you not unsatisfied? Just me dressed up as the gladiator dude. This just in, there's not that much interesting news. Yeah. Software is supply constrained. This is I wrote a little summary of this post, but if you go to the real write-up by Noful, I don't know. He's got a Substack called WR Reflection. So I don't know if that's like wide receiver reflection or reflection, like Wreck-It Ralph flexion, or just put a W in front of the word reflection for some reason. No clue. But he compared whatever his full name is. He compared the current moment of AI to the dial-up moment or era of the internet. And it's a good analogy in that in 1995, the internet was shitty and using it was a pain in the ass. And it was very easy to look at that and not necessarily extrapolate into what it would be. And we're probably in the same moment. I think that's probably all you can really do with the analogy, but it's a great headline. AI's dial-up era. But the takeaway, and what I think is really important to understand, is that there's some graphs. I'm going to scroll down. Scrolling. And there are a few graphs, I would say about 35% of the way down in this article. If you scroll, it was the predicted versus actual number of textile earners, workers, versus iron and steel workers, versus motor vehicle production workers over time. And if you were to look at like where they peaked, it was actually significantly after the major invention of whatever it was that, you know, in the case of textiles, the loom, in the iron and steel, all of the, factories that go into that automation, and same with motor vehicle production. Like the dip in demand for the humans to do the thing always lagged, and it's because of the effect that I've already forgotten the name of. The Jevons paradox, where the economic principle that a technological improvement in resource efficiency leads to an increase in the total consumption of that resource rather than a decrease. So thinking being, and how you apply this to, in retrospect, looking at these curves, it's like, oh, wow, if it gets a lot easier to make cars, instead of being a luxury good that can only be afforded by some people, suddenly it opens up a whole new market underneath of additional people who can fly cars, drive cars, or buy them. And so in the short term, we're actually going to need way more cars, which means we need all hands on deck. Anyone currently making cars, there's going to be plenty of money for you in the making cars business. But eventually we're going to saturate demand. And when we do, that's when we're going to start to see that drop off, because then the automation in combination with like the staffing levels are going to exceed the amount of demand remaining. And so we'll have oversupply of productive capacity for car making, and then we'll have fewer people working in car factories. So there's a lag where one of the reasons we had so many people building cars was we were supply constrained. And so companies had no choice but to hire a lot of people. If that doesn't sound familiar in the tech industry, why do we spend the last decade telling everyone to learn to code? It's because there was a economic imperative in a way that there wasn't even 10 years prior to that. That if you wanted to make money, there's always demand for more programmers. And some of us thought that would just go on forever, because what comes after digital? And, what if software is quickly becoming everything, then why wouldn't there always be money in software? The answer is, after software and the digital revolution, a digital transformation, there's the dystopia transformation, and that's the next one. And we're now starting that curve. So yeah, in the short term, aggregate demand for software developers, even though we're having a lot of layoffs that are ostensibly about AI and really just about profits, in the short term, developers aren't going anywhere. Why is that? Because suddenly the capacity increase represented by these AI tools is so great that all of a sudden lots of companies are able to imagine all of the software that they could create, that they could potentially have, that was previously off the table. Software ideas like little tiny nice to haves, ways to automate things internally, ways to, like maybe let's say you're a company and you do vendor management. And yes, you could theoretically automatically maybe eliminate a couple bean counters, automatically do the regression analysis to figure out, and then also the competitive research to figure out how to manage all these vendors and control costs better through predictive analysis. Maybe right now that's a couple full-time jobs and people working in spreadsheets, but imagine if I had a custom software solution that would just do this for me, that was unique and tailored to the particularities of my business and our supply chain, then I'd be able to eliminate those roles and also control those costs better, because instead of having just a quarterly review, I could have day-to-day continuous price adjustments in terms of the value that I'm willing to pay. And then I could, put that out to bid. But maybe, the amount of that I'd save on that is only a couple $100,000 a year. And if that's the case, spending $2 million and spending 2 years of my focus and attention to have a team build custom software for me, I'm not even going to propose that. I'm not even going to maybe even think it if I'm in a meeting, if I'm the executive, because I know it's small potatoes relative to the extremely high investment whenever custom software has to get developed in my environment. Now, if Johnny come lately can vibe code that in a couple days and get a good enough approximation of it and get it deployed and tested and working, the supply of software had previously been extremely limited because of the cost of having to handcraft every single little fucking thing and having to pay specialists like me and probably you a lot of money to build it. But if those costs are going way down, suddenly it's if I'm an executive, I've got a list that goes from being 3 major software projects every year to a whole leadership team generating 30, 40, 50 software projects. And yes, at some point, we will either saturate our demand for software projects in each given organization, or we'll reach some sort of other natural limit where it's the limiting factor will no longer be the ability for programmers to write code, but maybe the ability of the organization to administer and use, or have the cognitive overhead of managing and using all these pieces of software. Who's to say? But that's you read this article and you think about it and you're yes, two things can simultaneously be true. And this is my point, is this is a really, really great time to be a software developer and to be engaged in these tools, because we can suddenly build all this cool shit that we never would have before. I never would have built an iMessage web archive view based on the SQLite database that the Messages app creates in macOS until I could have a Claude do it for me in a few hours. And now I've got a really slick way to visualize backups of messages in a way that's portable and doesn't require you to be on a Mac and, load it into a particular user's view. That probably would have taken me weeks. But now there's some more shovelware. And I'm just a dude, right? I don't even have like a financial interest in that. I was just trying to calm my mom down when she thinks she deleted her text thread with my dad. So I don't know, like that makes sense, right? The other thing is also true that like longer term, if you click through, I used a particular phrase. What did I say? That we haven't really even tasted the rainbow yet in terms of what exactly the increase in supply looks like, because all of these tools are brand new and most people have no experience with them. Um, I mean, every time I talk to developers, I'm shocked continually about how few people have really used these tools in Anchor. And apparently it's enough to like already light the world on fire and have all these servers fall over on themselves. So like somebody's using them, but it's way fewer people and it's way more nascent. This is like 6 month old technology at best. And the version that we had 6 months ago was way less capable than the versions we have today. And most of the things that make these coding agents shitty is like not the LLM, it's all of the dressing around it. It's like the tools and the snapshots and the developer, the DX, the developer experience around it. So food for thought. Next item. So that was a really good article. Go read the original. Sandwich Video, also owners and proprietors of Sandwich Vision, the Vision OS application maker of the App Theater, owned by Adam Lizagor. Adam has become a friend of mine. He's a great guy. He's a really optimistic guy. I want to have him on the show. I want to have him on Hotfix, but first he'd have to get mad about something, and that dude's always so fucking happy. I know he looks demure in his commercials, but he's like a really optimistic guy. I try not to be a downer around him because he's just like, man, he's whatever he's got. I want to protect that. They made a commercial for robot.com. I don't know what robot.com does. Presumably a lot of these cool robots. There's lots of robots in the commercial, and it's about, you know, how us humans are getting along with them. And they made that commercial, and Adam went out of his way to use one of those new fancy Apple Immersive Video compatible spatial cameras and take additional shots, sometimes the same scene, you know, like while filming, and sometimes of like a recreation of that scene. And if you watch the immersive version, you will see in a flat screen format, a smaller resolution, but like still you can see in the color grading and stuff is all kind of professionally edited. You can see that in a small view, and then you see the perspective of the full 180-degree Apple Immersive view in spatial 3 dimensions. And seeing that contrast of like just how much more, it's one thing to watch immersive video. It's another thing to see it side by side with like, and here's what the flat version on a YouTube page would look like. And so experientially, and you can watch it in his Theater app if you have a Vision Pro, experientially is a really revelatory experience. It's like, holy shit, immersive video really is that much more engaging. It's whatever, the equivalent of going from a 4:3 CRT that's only rendering your Super Nintendo game at 240 pixels lines of resolution to 4K in terms of the amount of visual information and the, not, we say sense of presence, but really it's just like your eyeballs are full of what you're looking at. So that was a really cool thing, you know, and now he gets credit for having the first ever immersive commercial. Kind of neat. Prediction marmots prediction markets are having their day in the sun. There have been all sorts of, you know, basically the deregulation around prediction markets like Polymarket, where you can just have a contract for basically anything. You know, will the sun come up tomorrow? And you can bet yes or no and take whatever odds the algorithm lands at. And the market takes a cut, just like any sort of bookie. Somebody had a market for let's see, what was the actual contract? the contract had to do with during the Coinbase quarterly results. What would certain words get used by Brian Armstrong, the CEO? And that was a contract, and you could bet on it that he would or wouldn't use a certain set of words, something like that. And then he closed out the call, and he just said these words. He said Bitcoin, Ethereum, blockchain, staking, and Web3, and then drops the mic. As cryptic and makes no sense to anybody who's not terminally online, but the people who've been like listening to that call, playing their bingo card, like they're parlaying, multiple like sports bets or something, and this is a game, except there's no rules to this game, and he's got awareness of the market. He can just say whatever the fuck he wants. He legally, he could have been invested in that contract, because it's not like there's an insider trading law against this. You might get banned from the platform, right, for manipulating the outcome. But prediction markets are kind of for suckers. Either you're on the inside and you know the answer to the question of the thing that you're betting on, or you're the sucker. Very few things in this world don't change, are unchangeable, unflinching in the face of observation by other humans. Almost every outcome, there's some spin on the ball. The 2024 election was heavily impacted by the prediction markets. Why? Because the pollsters start looking at the prediction markets, and it starts changing everything about how they fucking model, forecast, and even sample skew their own polls, which then both of those feed into the news cycle, which then reinforces narratives or starts new ones. What Jane Goodall was, she was the one who was like, you can't observe an ecosystem without impacting it. It's like prediction markets have that effect. I don't know. If you're going to run a scam, prediction market scams seem ripe for the picking. And it seems like they're not going to get regulated anymore anytime soon. OpenAI and Microsoft, you may be familiar that they have a deal where Microsoft made a capital investment, but also an in-kind investment of like $10 billion in exchange for basically perpetual access to all of OpenAI's intellectual property. OpenAI would get like $10 billion of Azure credits that they could then use on training models as well as inference for their various products. It included various amounts of exclusivity agreements. It also ties OpenAI's hands if they want to do this for-profit transition, which is necessary if they're going to go and do an IPO and start trading on the stock market. And now, as in history, they're the most valuable private company in the world, and I'm sure a lot of people would like to be able to unlock that value by going out to the market and selling their shares. They have a tremendous incentive to try to get out of that constraint with Microsoft. And hinging on it all is like the definition of what AGI is, because the terms of the original agreement had something to the effect of, OpenAI was bound by all of this stuff until they reached AGI. And so from Microsoft's perspective, they're like, well, we're nowhere near there yet. And that's why Sam Altman has been sort of working the refs ever since, realizing he wants out of this thing to try to say, well, a semi-autonomous researcher, that's AGI. And Microsoft say, yeah, good luck. So they came to a new agreement that they announced, and OpenAI is making it look like this was a big victory. But if you look through, and I actually made ChatGPT give me a list of like who gets what out of this, Microsoft walks away with like a lot more than OpenAI does. Microsoft has a now 27% proper stake in the for-profit arm of the company, which is like already $135 billion value. Of course, it means that they had a $13 billion write-down in just like running expenses in their last quarterly that they had to account for, because OpenAI, that part of their portfolio, is losing that much fucking money. They get, let's see, exclusive IP rights and Azure API exclusivity for OpenAI's models until either like the first of these happens, either the year 2032 rolls around or we reach AGI. Microsoft also secures $250 billion in spending commitments from OpenAI, which ain't nothing. And yeah, You know, it gave Microsoft a pretty big valuation boost in the market just because like they frankly took OpenAI for a fucking ride. OpenAI basically at this point just gets, you know, the ability to work with others. Microsoft also is free from having to work with OpenAI exclusively in their own attempts to reach AGI, even though they do continue to get all of OpenAI's secrets. So they can kind of like, you know, if this was class, they could like look over Sam Altman's shoulder, grab all the answers, and then just go a little bit further with some other partner and beat OpenAI to the punch in theory. So strategically, it's kind of fucked. And OpenAI really doesn't get much out of it other than being able to do this IPO, essentially. And, you know, for other investors, that's a way for them to attract more capital, because if I'm investing in OpenAI and there's no chance of an exit, right, that's not a great investment. And so a lot of the current investment is really an IOU to OpenAI, contingent on this particular for-profit / IPO organizational change. Everything is just this like, you know, series of dependencies that all comes back down to investors haven't actually handed money yet and will not hand money over until they're going to get their money back, or at least theoretically can, which is really, you know, tied OpenAI's hands. So they agreed to all this. Now, like, the reason that this is interesting to me is in OpenAI's statement. Once AGI is declared by OpenAI, that declaration will now be verified by an independent expert panel. Because the real sticking point of the original agreement was like they use this term in this contract as if it's like a commonly understood thing. Like that is that any Tom, Dick, and Harry or circuit court judge would be able to look at this thing, or like some, you know, judicial tribunal in Delaware would be able to look at AGI and know it when they see it. Which, of course, is ridiculous, especially if everyone has a different definition of what AGI is. So this totally clears that up, because the declaration will be verified by an independent expert panel. Says nothing about who is on that expert panel, what the criteria are to be. I hereby volunteer as tribute. I would love to be on that panel. I would ask it to make funny jokes, make me laugh. And if you can't make me laugh, if you can't make funny jokes, you're out. Something tells me we're a ways out. But yeah, it's silly. I don't know, man. OpenAI makes less and less sense the more you look at them. The products, hey, they do what they do. Two other companies, not named in the previous story, Amazon and Perplexity. Boy, my pronunciation. I'm going to take a little sip of water. Unique New York. Amazon issued a cease and desist because Perplexity is a Comet browser, which is an agentic browser which does stuff on behalf of the user. It is making purchases. It's clicking around Amazon. You know, you say, hey, I want to buy this, and it's disintermediating Amazon from the deal. So that means that, you know, it's looking at Amazon search and it knows to ignore all the sponsored results that sponsors pay for, which is a huge chunk of how Amazon makes money, because the actual selling of goods to you is a relatively low margin business, but the selling of search placement ads is a very high margin business because it costs Amazon nothing. Well, if you're using the Comet browser and telling Amazon to or telling your agent to go buy shit for you, you're not looking at those ads. And it's doing a lot more research, and it's basically removing Amazon's agency, so to speak, from the process of kind of putting some spin on the ball in terms of what you're going to buy. And they don't like that because they want to upsell you. Maybe they don't want to upsell you in terms of how much you pay for a good, although there's a little bit of that happening. The upsell is really by steering you to maybe Amazon basic products that are copycat products of whatever Chinesium is being drop shipped by some third-party seller of alphabet soup. Or they want to upsell you by steering you towards ads and then rewarding people who are paying for sponsored slots with increase in revenue. Because right now, if you want to sell anything on Amazon, you kind of know that you need to both sign up for the usuriously expensive fulfillment by Amazon service, where they're kind of doing all of the, you know, distribution for you. You get the Prime same day shipping or next day shipping, you know, service kind of built into that, but you're also paying very, very high rates for things like opening the box of items that like you as a manufacturer or as a reseller are sending Amazon, and then paying another fee for them to put those items into the appropriate bin so that they can get picked at the distribution center. And then for things like processing returns and all that, because Amazon's handling that as well. All of that you're getting nickel and dimed, but you kind of have to play ball, because if you want to sell on Amazon and you want to ship and sell it yourself, you're going to get deranked in not only the search listings, but also in terms of how many people click through to buy your shit. So Amazon's got a vice grip on monetizing both the inputs and the outputs here. And they make money off of every bit of sale through the fulfillment business and on every bit of sale through the sponsored business. And this is why Lena Khan and Elizabeth Warren and all of them wanted to, antitrust them out of existence and kind of are correct on the merits, but nothing's going to change. What could change, right, is if your browser just cut through the noise, at least at the sponsored ads side, and just like figured out what to buy and bought it. That would be a big blow to Amazon's business. Not right away, but as soon as the sponsors realize that it doesn't matter so much, they might actually compete instead on the merits of the quality of their product, which is an important thing to compete on, except Amazon doesn't make a cut off that. So Amazon's pissed, and Perplexity's, their statement, this is quoting from TechCrunch. Perplexity's argument is that since its agent is acting on behalf of a human user's direction, the agent automatically has the same permissions as the human user. The implication is that it doesn't have to identify itself as an agent, whereas Amazon's complaint is primarily that Perplexity's Comet browser is faking Chrome's user agent string, and it's casting about as if it was a human itself. Well, it's interesting, right? Because on one hand, terms of service being what they are, the Computer Crime, Fraud, and Abuse Act, which is something else we talked about recently, it's pretty clear. It's that's mostly about the intention. It's if the terms of service don't allow it and you're not technically allowed to do a thing, you're committing a kind of wire fraud, in a sense. But on the flip side, if you're a website and everything you're doing is public, and at what point, right, where do you draw the line exactly? If the browser is showing you, I don't know, a sidebar of other deals, right? If it's looking at the page and it's proposing alternative vendors to you, which is something that browsers like Microsoft Edge have experimented with in the past, is that a violation of terms of service in the same way? If a user installs a browser extension like Camel to look at the history and maybe render on the page oh, this is a historical low for this item, or right now this is a historical high for this item in terms of price, is that a violation of terms of service? Because after a certain point, it's just a user using a tool, right? And browsers aren't simple, we're 20 years hence from browsers being naive windows into the, internet, into just rendering your HTML and your CSS without any opinion whatsoever. Browsers have become way more than that, not just because of extensions, but because of proprietary, slop put on top of all of the standards that have become just de facto part of the experience of using an internet browser. It's an application platform in a lot of ways. So the big tech companies have been able to take advantage of this up until this point, but when the clients get more sophisticated, suddenly, the browser had been the last bastion of freedom. The open web suffers in a lot of ways, but the thing propping it up is that if Amazon really wanted to sell digital goods or whatever, through iOS and Android, they didn't have the books and Kindle stuff even sorted until relatively recently, because they'd have to pay 30 or 15% depending on to the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. So that walled garden pushed a lot of people towards investments into web technologies. What are they going to do now? Say that Amazon, the only way to access Amazon is through an Electron app or something? They're by virtue of the fact that Safari is kind of the only show in town on iOS, that helps a little bit. But of course, you could use UI web views on the Comet browser the follow up to the Arc browser, could potentially kind of give you the same experience on a phone. But what this seems to me is, it seems to me like Amazon is trying to pick this fight now to try to get the court precedent, the same way that Google kind of went out of their way to make a big stink about scanning books in whatever year that was, 2004, 2005, when they would go to the University of Michigan, go to the library, rip the spines off the books, scan all the books. Google was able to say, we're doing a service for humanity here. And therefore, when it was challenged in court by authors, they said, this is fair use because we're just making it available for the purpose of excerpts and people finding pages on books. And it's going to lead to more people finding more books and buying those books because you can't read the whole book on Google. Google won that case, and that was a really important precedent for all sorts of shenanigans they did later that was significantly less noble sounding. Amazon here is probably trying to get the precedent locked in that this is bad and that user agents can't just do whatever the fuck they want just because there's a human driving behind the wheel. Because we're probably only 9 months away from iOS 27 getting announced and having a lot of similar agentic quote unquote workflows where it's not just the Safari browser, but it's everywhere in the system. If you're able to have the on-screen awareness that Apple's promised with Siri, and you combine it with an LLM and tools, you could probably imagine a world where you say, hey, go to the Amazon app, find me the best hammer, look at 50 reviews, go have fun, and then you put your phone back on the charger, and then it buys the thing. If that's coming, that's going to feel even more like a human using a tool because you're talking to it and telling it what to do than this kind of goofy third-party browser dingus that's doing all this other stuff and has all these proxy servers and stuff because the phone is completely local, right? Amazon probably doesn't want that fight. They want to pick on the little guy, Perplexity, whose leadership has been doing all kinds of shady shit in the past and who seemingly, from a reputational perspective, everyone loves to hate Perplexity. They would love to pick this fight now and win and get the precedent so that when Apple rolls around, they're on at least pins and needles about whether or not they can get away with a lot of the same kind of functionality. Because if Amazon were to wait, same goes for, The Verge, Nilay Patel calls this the DoorDash problem. If DoorDash and Uber and Lyft allow themselves to be disintermediated, suddenly all of whatever their product is just becomes a commodity. It's already a commodity, but right now it's a commodity you can upsell. You can sell a membership to. You can gussy up additional kind of add-on services. You can upgrade what kind of car you're driving or whatever. If the agent's just doing price shopping for you, then suddenly your business just becomes you're a toll booth in some sort of dispatch. You're nothing more, right? You become a dumb pipe in a lot of ways, the same way ISPs fought tooth and nail to not become dumb pipes and then became dumb pipes. So interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where this goes. I'm curious where you land on this actually, because I could imagine not just AI skeptics, but people who really believe in the veracity of terms of service of software, OILAs, so to speak, potentially taking, at least attitudinally taking Amazon's side. But more and more, I think the longer you think about this as, should users be authorized to use their computer however the fuck they see fit? It's hard not to take Perplexity's side in this, if you got a strong take, write in podcast@searls.co. Well, I would love to hear it. But I don't know, what if a human were to click too fast across too many different listings, would that be considered to be unfair advantage to the user to be able to read that many reviews that quickly? Is that how we want to cap it? At what point is computer assisted help illegal? And how would you possibly make rules around that? There needs to be some sort of limiting factor, and identifying that limiting factor when we're all engaging in computers, and computers are things that are designed to be the bicycle for the mind and allow humans to do things that they couldn't do in the physical world quite so quickly. Like, at what level does automation become unacceptable? And then we get into this idea of like, well, we got to just legislate AI, and that genie is out of the bottle, my friend. Last story here. Not a lot going on in the video game world. A lot of new releases. I'll talk about one of those in a minute. But EA is being bought by the Saudis. I'm not sure I mentioned that. EA wants to be bought by the Saudis. And part of that is probably going to be leaning in really hard to the easy to monetize parts of their business, like don't call it FIFA, but like their football club game. So EA's FC series that's mostly just selling loot box style cards for people to build soccer teams. Makes a ton of money. Madden makes a ton of money. Those things they can just turn the crank and make a ton of money. Building narrative experiences and good polished single player games seems to lose them a lot of money most of the time. And basically every creative thing that they do seems to be a stinker. So when the Saudis come in with the Saudi money, one suspects that they're probably going to, EA as we know them will probably go away. If not right away, over the course of years, it'll no longer really resemble a video game publisher that anybody really cares about. And BioWare recently announced big layoffs. Their big Dragon Age game, Veilguard, was a flop. A string of flops. Mass Effect Andromeda, also a flop. Mass Effect 3, kind of a flop. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic is still going strong because it's basically just a server that's turned on that just prints a certain amount of money every month, but they laid off a lot of the people working on that too. So a lot of people are doubting. It's like, hey, well, BioWare has this promise they're going to build a new Mass Effect game and it's going to somehow be good. Mass Effect is a sort of an epic space opera. It's one of the last new intellectual properties that were developed and pushed on video games or via video games to tell a grand epic story about cool sci-fi space travel stuff. And so a lot of people, myself included, played through Mass Effect 1, 2 is really good, 3, not so good, and had a lot of fond memories, right? New franchise, new story, new world, and not a lot of games being made like that anymore. Certainly not in new IP. And if you're going to get anything that kind of feels that way, it's probably got to be an existing established franchise. But even the ones that are existing established franchises, like the Star Wars games being made recently, they're much more focused and unambitious. Like the Jedi Fallen Order is basically just Dark Souls with lightsabers. It's not like a big story to tell. Mass Effect 5, however, at least it's of a piece, with these other things. And they know that they want to tell a big story. But there's no evidence that it's actually happening or that it's staffed up, and BioWare just keeps losing people. So just today, breaking news, BioWare has confirmed that EA remains committed to the project and that Mass Effect 5 is still coming. So I have no hope. I think it's going to be bad, but I think I'm going to... Oh yeah, Anthem. Anthem also bombed. I suspect that all the people at BioWare who were really good at making some of my favorite RPGs, like the original Knights of the Old Republic, I think they're just gone now. And I think this is going to be bad or disappointing or not come out. But EA remains committed. And I wanted to share that because if you're also a video game guy, there's not a lot to be hopeful for from a lot of these beloved franchises and esteemed publishers. But there is one game that isn't disappointing, and space is involved. We'll talk about it now. We're in the home stretch here, folks. All these my electrician got back to me, by the way, and says power surges are not covered by warranties. So I'm gonna have to go have them out again, install another transformer. It sounds like fun. Recommendations, only a couple. One, The Outer Worlds 2 is I wouldn't call it a grand epic space opera so much as a satirical focused role-playing game with shooting mechanics. But it takes place in outer space and tells an interesting-ish story. The satire is, I wouldn't say ha-ha funny, but it's like, and maybe it's a little too on the nose at times with the capitalism stuff. But compared to the original, the first game, it's much more ambitious. It's much more polished. And since this team also came out with Avowed this year, which was one of my favorite games in a long time, probably my favorite fantasy RPG since Dragon Age Origins, 15, 20 years ago, talking about EA back when they made good games. That was also BioWare. Yeah, Outer Worlds 2. It's very good. If you play video games, you should play that one. It's more of a shooter than I want it to be. When I'm playing a role-playing game, I want to think in terms of, but hey, this is Obsidian. They made Fallout New Vegas. Some pretty shitty shooting mechanics in that game. The owners of Obsidian made the original Fallout 2, which is like a tactical turn-based game, and Fallout. So they're good at the story side, and they're really good at skill checks, like based on how many skill points you have in a particular category, that determines what you can say in dialogue. And it means you can get out of interesting situations or get into your interesting situations based entirely on the particular character that you've created and where you've chosen to invest in skills or in attributes. And I find that to be the most fascinating thing. That's the fun part for me, is I want to see and experiment with the consequences of the character that I build in terms of how this game can play out differently. Hence the role-playing aspect. Knowing that every single encounter is going to ultimately come down to how fast am I on the trigger, and regardless of how much, I've worked to level up my character or invest in particular, crafting recipes for improved, I don't know, attachments on my gun even, that's all going to take a backseat to my reflexes and ability to use precision pointing on an analog stick to get a headshot. It's kind of a bummer because it takes away from the role-playing emphasis and it just becomes yet another shooter. And at that point, why not play a shooter? Because every shooter out there is also picking up RPG elements. And so games have sort of flattened out overall into everything is kind of an RPG. Everything is kind of a something, but also a something else. And so the genres have blended into just sort of this morass where everything is everything and nothing feels that distinct anymore. And Outer Worlds 2, right out the gate, I feel is victim to that. It's just slightly more emphasis on the RPG side. Definitely nowhere near being what's lately being called an ImSim, or an immersive simulator, which is a reference to particular kinds of really, really systems heavy games like Deus Ex or System Shock or BioShock, or Prey. So I don't know. It's good. It's as good as anything that's going to come out this year. That's that kind of jam. So I'm enjoying it. Other recommendation. We've talked a little bit about how ChatGPT is making some people delusional, but it's also a thing that some delusional people are using. And there's a lot of demand for stories that are hey, look, ChatGPT made y'all crazy. And because it's definitionally news because it is topical and ties into kind of the big drivers of the broader narrative that people are interested in. But I think it's fair to have a lot of questions about how much of this is actually ChatGPT's doing and how much of it is people who already have mental health disorders engaging with ChatGPT, and then the outcome being, you could say that the outcome's the exact same. It's just that there's now this chatbot involved in it. You could say that the chatbot is accelerating something, just the same way that the chatbot might accelerate me to program computers faster. But it's a whole other kettle of fish to say actually it's instigating the delusion, that in the absence of the chatbot, the delusion would not be there, and that it is the thing injecting it. Now, one argument in favor of that is that there's a lot of people operating under a lot of delusions that they weren't previously. whether it's about vaccine hesitancy or wellness crystals, right? And like a lot of the kind of bullshit people have picked up over the years, just by virtue of our connectedness in social networking apps, right? The algorithm kind of steers you increasingly towards Gwyneth Paltrow-y content, and then all of a sudden you've been gooped. Same goes for Bobby Kennedy Jr. and his particular shtick. Like, you end up believing things that aren't true. QAnon, another example, just of a concentrated one. So it's not to say that, like, doing stuff on our computers can lead to us believing in things that are complete bullshit and becoming really attached to those bullshit things. So I'm open to the idea that, like, ChatGPT making y'all crazy, causing suicides and murders and whatnot. But even I was pretty surprised. Eddie Burback, who's an 28-year-old internet YouTube comedian who is very good at what he does, and he's starting to make longer form videos. This is over an hour. It's already got 2.75 million views on it. The title is called ChatGPT Made Me Delusional. And he did a good video that I talked about a few months back where he went without a smartphone for a while, which, now that I know he's only 28, is a relatively radical experiment. I'm sure he had a lot of fun in a way that I would have felt nostalgia. He felt, was really novel. In this case, he started down this rabbit hole by simply kind of pushing ChatGPT just a little bit. Now, this is all using 4.0, right? And that's important. He even talks about that. It switched to him to 5 one day, and suddenly it was like pushing back on him, and he didn't like that. So he switched back to 4.0 immediately. So that's relevant. He's clearly got the defaults turned on in terms of chat history. So like there is a setting, both personalization memories, like you can have ChatGPT build and retain automatically memories about you based on past conversations. And you can also allow it to reference other chats that you've had with it and look at those conversational logs as part of the sort of like initial context for subsequent conversations. Both of those, because they poison the context and they also take up a lot of those tokens, the more tokens that you layer on top of, a foundation model, however many parameters that foundation model is, actually, the more it is, the more that you slather these extra tokens on top in the form of like an individual user's personalization or their chat history, the more it's kind of like staying on the 13th deck of a cruise ship. Like, the cruise ship is unbelievably stable. It's a very, very stable thing on top of an ocean. But the 13th deck, you're going to get a lot of natural movement back and forth. So if decks 3 through 10 are just all this extra state, you're just going to get a lot more sway and variance in terms of the quality of the responses that you get. Well, all he had to do, I'm only spoiling the first 20 minutes of this, maybe. All he had to do was comment that he, was a really smart baby and drew a fake picture of a thing that he claimed he drew when he was an infant, and get ChatGPT on board with like believing this and not disputing or pushing back that a baby probably couldn't have invented the iPhone before the iPhone existed. And then said, like, hey, maybe I was the smartest baby. And it's like, maybe you were. Like, no, not just in like my school, but like in 1996 in the whole world. And it's like, maybe you were, right? And like, just all it took was like getting into like buying that premise, and the number of downstream things he was able to goad ChatGPT into buying into, and then promulgating and synthesizing and starting, now it's almost as if like once ChatGPT gets red pilled, it stays over there and starts introducing other sort of delusional and disordered thinking that's just reminiscent of other things that you've probably seen on the internet in terms of when you've had family or friends or heard of people getting stuck into cults or these deep rabbit holes. It starts just promoting those, and pretty soon it's got him doing. Go watch it. I'll stick the link in. It increased the likelihood in my mind that there is a civil liability risk to the chatbot makers when all is said and done, and people start to unwind how these tools are interacting with average people who don't understand that they're using a tool. Especially this desire to make them so personable that they're relying heavily on your context instead of wiping the slate on each new chat. So, good times. Yeah. We're in the home stretch here. Send me something interesting to do. Send me some recommendations. Before Outer Worlds 2 came out, I was just so uninspired. I was playing like a lot of Tetris Connected. Just like not a lot out there. So, podcast at Searles.co. I realize there's a ton of games and stuff. I need some personal recommendations from you, dear listener. Speaking of you, dear listener, let's open up the mailbag.
You've got mail.
Aaron writes in, subject, enjoying the podcast. Message, just letting you know. All right. More like that, please. I'll read those all day. Jesse writes in, Basecamp says, I'm really enjoying the show and wanted to say keep up the good work. If only that was the entire message, Jesse, but you also have a question. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Basecamp as a company and their shape-up methodology. Do you generally align with Jason Fried and DHH's business philosophy, or are there areas where you disagree with their approach? I'm curious about what aspects of their thinking resonate with you and what points you think they might be getting wrong. Now, this is a little tough because I've been caught in David and Jason's gravitational orbit for my entire adult life almost, since I was 20 years old. And that's a lot of blog posts and a lot of takes and a lot of their books that I have not bought, but have had to suffer other people baby birding to me at various employers and conferences over the years. I've never met Jason. I'm acquaintances with David, I would say. Although obviously since retiring from speaking, I have less reason to run into him than I used to. Shape Up, if you haven't heard of it, is a project management approach for product companies to have these 6-week cadences where you have very small groups, like 2 people, I think. And I'm fuzzy on the exact details or the rules of the game, but so you have a couple of people who will have a mandate for like a particular feature, and they'll shape it a certain way and try to like deliver something in that 6 weeks period, but they have like a lot of latitude in that time period. And then some of those experiments will succeed and some will fail, and that's all okay. And it's mostly about striking the right balance of autonomy and direction with time boundaries to keep the expense of having that level of autonomy just leading to things going off the rails entirely. Like early days GitHub had a lot of the same autonomy and even to a certain degree direction, but there was no time boxing that would ever have the feedback loop complete. And the editorial process, the curation, never really happened because there was never really explicit approval or decision of a go, no go. It would just sit there in staff mode, meaning like the other GitHubbers were able to use it or not use it. But in terms of whether it shipped to everybody, it was like there was always this unclarity. And the more bold and decisive GitHubbers who kind of just push shit through into production and ask forgiveness instead of permission, they end up getting their shit out, right? That's one way to run a business. So ShapeUp has more, I think, more to say about making sure that the product, direction is not only followed, but validated, and without being too top down in terms of just turning it into a yet another death march of like success is mandated, and therefore after the end of 6 weeks, like this feature will go out, and we will permanently adopt whatever amount of tech debt is involved or product misalignment is involved, and we will rework it later. Rework, another book that they wrote. So in general, I think that they have pretty good instincts, especially as applied to, I would say, like medium-sized software companies. I think a lot of their advice breaks down when you try to apply it to even departments inside of enterprises or large companies, because I've seen a lot of large companies try to adopt various aspects of the sort of Basecamp or 37 Signals way of doing things over the years. And a lot of like startups try to pull things in when it's just one or two people. And so it's either it's their way of doing things tends to be at a level of abstraction and complexity that makes sense if you're like 100-person company, and a lot less sense if you're a 2-person company because it would be too much process and ceremony, or a 2,000-person company because it's going to be, insufficiently considerate of all of the other complications that come along with that. And it's not just the complexity of the process, but the impatience, right? There's a kind of every process has a certain amount of boldness and impatience built into it. And I tend to be a high impatience person. I don't like obstacles. And I that's something I have in common with David for sure. So you want to enable people, individuals to get shit done independently. And that works, that can be made to work in organizations up to a certain size class and regulatory constraint class and technology class. Like there are certain ways that like eventually you reach a point where the extrinsic constraints are enough that individual autonomy must be sacrificed and that impatience must be disrespected and tamped down in the form of change management and slow, careful plotting, thoughtful, either interdisciplinary or like interpersonal communication is mandated. So all that to say, I think that like their particular perspective is as good and as cohesive as any for 50 to 150 person software shops. But also, like, they're really opinionated. They act like a lot of like their way of doing things is the only sensible way because I don't know, like it worked for them, so therefore it's the only right answer. I'm a big believer that there's a infinite number of right answers. There's also infinite number of worse answers, but there's so many different ways of doing things that acting like your way is the way is hubris, and it's just arrogant. And sometimes they can creep into that mode as well. I more view it as abstractions. So like I hear about ShapeUp, I think about it in terms of, okay, well, I'm going to compare that to the other things that I know. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to kind of rummage around in my head and just do the pattern recognition to tell me like, could I see this working? And the answer might be yes. And if it's yes, then it's like, okay, then I will earnestly give this a shot and play by exactly these rules in exactly this way. And I will trial it out. And I'll trial it out, not just for a week, I'll trial it out long enough to like really get a sense of whether or not this works or doesn't. And then if it doesn't work, just like, it would prescribe for the activity of each feature. If it's not working, I could either at that point, I could say that I'm doing that process and just contort it to my particular purposes such that it's no longer that process. I'm just calling it that so that I'm not admitting failure, right? Or having to go find some other process. And that seems to be what most people did. So when I know a lot of organizations that adopted ShapeUp, and, they found that they were wasting a lot of time, or more often they found that a lot of these 2 and 3 person teams that were designing individual things themselves were not sufficiently competent to ship things by themselves. Another difference at Basecamp 37 Signals is that they typically were able to hire extremely competent and sophisticated, experienced developers because of their notoriety in the Rails community. And so like you could take any 2 or 3 of any of them and build a thing independently that would be at a, it would work, it would ship, it would be at a sufficiently high level of quality. It might even have things that you could extract out as independent open source or as part of Rails and contribute stuff back upstream. Like all that good stuff requires like a pretty high skill set. A lot of teams I saw use ShapeUp, they didn't have that level of either on the front end, the product sophistication to know what the direction is and set it with the amount of confidence that they could run for 6 weeks, or give 2-3 people, hey, a mandate to go work on independently for 6 weeks. And like, they just didn't have the competence to be able to work unmonitored, unassisted for that long and arrive at a valuable outcome. And so a lot of companies got found out I think teams got, exposed as being less competent. And it's a lot harder to say, hey, it turns out that like we're just not good enough to do this than to say, okay, well, we do shape up, but we also have all of these extra, you know, deadlines and design checks and other, complications and audits and stuff that remediate the process to fit our own particularities. Some amount of customizations are going to make sense because nothing's a one size fits all solution. But I think there's a desire, an endless desire. So blowhards, like somebody like a David in this case, he can just say this is the way, capital T, capital W. And I'd say he'd be wrong if he did that because there's a million right ways to do stuff. That's going to always have an audience because there's a much larger group of people who are so desperate to be handed the way, capital T, capital W, so that they can be freed of the burden of having to figure it out, of having to develop their own custom process and iterate, especially if it forces them to put up a microscope to their organization and admit to themselves that like maybe they don't have it figured out. Maybe they're not that good. Maybe what they're trying to do isn't really worth trying to do. Maybe their business is just kind of systemically fucked. And like the best they can hope to do is just fire all the developers and turn the crank and extract whatever profit they can from the husk of the organization because they're too creatively bankrupt to figure out or solve the innovator's dilemma or respond to the macro change that might be impacting them, whatever it is. Like a lot of companies in the world are just like, they are the Titanic and they're sinking, and they might be able to bucket water faster if they were better water bucket fuckerers, but they're not, and so they're gonna sink. They're destined to sink. But if they were to admit that too soon, it would be too fractious, and so they kind of just have to like coast for a while. And a lot of those, more than you think, a lot of individuals and a lot of teams and a lot of organizations and a lot of entire businesses are sort of in that, call it 30, 40, 50 year decline, right? And even if they were to admit the truth and say, hey, yeah, eventually this is going to go out of business. Eventually we're just going to all be tits up here. Like if they were to admit that and they're publicly traded, then like maybe they go to zero faster. And so they got to keep up this charade. And how much of life is just people keeping up charades, I wonder. I don't really wonder because I know the answer to that question. So anyway, that's what I think, Jesse. I'm going to call it. I want to be done. You want to be done? I want to be done. I want to get on with the day. I'm going to go do my Build with Becky program, which you can learn more about at betterwithbecky.com. Or if you forget that, you can also, I guess, go to buildwithbecky.com and be redirected. But it's a strength training program that my wife makes. That's a subscription that points to an application that I made. And if you ask me what methodology I used, I will not say Shape Up.